Hey, what's up guys, Mr. Macrat here. In today's video, we're going to be having a bit of a discussion with Feral Interactive about their upcoming mobile port, Total War Empire. Alright guys, here we are with Feral Interactive. Very good to have you guys here. And today we're going to be talking about Total War Empire. So would you lovely guys like to introduce yourself?
So I'm Edwin. I head up the design team at Feral. Worked on pretty much every mobile game we've worked on and every Mac game before that. So yeah, quite familiar with Total War. And I'll let Benedict introduce himself.
Benedict Parker. I am the design lead on Empire Mobile. I was also the design lead on the previous game, Medieval 2 Mobile.
So I've got a whole list of questions I was going to go through for Total War Empire. Could you briefly go over, well you've kind of already done this, but could you briefly go over the games you've brought to mobile?
We started off with Rome Total War, but we started off doing it for iPad. So it was very much, can you take a huge AAA strategy game and put it on mobile without removing things? Because when we first did Rome, everyone who had a mobile version of a game, you basically had the cut down one, and the only thing that was kind of the same with the original game was like the title and the name, and everything else was like cut down and tiny. So we were like, right, let's put it on an iPad. We have a big screen, but we need to get touch and everything else working. And that went down really, really well. So we were like, okay, now how do we shrink that onto a phone? So we redesigned the interface from scratch for how it works on a phone, and also made some improvements to battle and everything. And then we were like, well, now that we've solved that problem, let's try and get it to work on other platforms as well, like Android and things. After we did that, we were like, okay, let's get rolling. So we did Rome, Barbarian Invasion, Rome Alexander, then Grid Autosport, which was a racing game. We then did Tropico Mobile, then Company of Heroes and all of the expansions for that. XCOM 2, which Benedict was also involved in.
Some kind of tracker. It's been modified.
Alien Isolation, Total War Medieval 2, Sid Meier's Railroads, Hitman Blood Money Reprisal, and now Total War Empire.
A huge collection.
Yeah, so I think that's the 12th mobile game now. So,
yeah, 12.
Yeah.
You've brought so many of the Rome games to mobile, it's awesome. For Empire, how long has the iOS port been in development?
All of the different departments start at different times, so design starts long before dev. So I think sort of, development, it's normally these games are about a year, maybe a little bit longer for sort of just getting it up and running. But I mean, Benedict, when did I first ask you to start looking at the designs?
Well, it would have been a little bit before Medieval 2 shipped, so probably about 2022 sometime. And then, yeah, I've been on it since. Though I think I've been thinking about it even before you asked me.
Yeah.
Bit of a nerd in that respect.
Yeah. I think it's always the thing with design is you'll go on and off looking at something quite far in advance just to be like, right, what are the big problems? You kind of write them down, mull it over, and then it might not have lots and lots of day-to-day work for a while. But it's always useful to be thinking about when you're solving problems for Med 2, would this work for Empire? Or something which is cool in Empire that you might want to put across other games, things like that. So, yeah.
One thing that I don't see mentioned quite a lot from developers, and it would be really cool to see your take, is how you manage keeping iOS devices cool under heavy gaming loads.
Right, I'll take this one because
I'm not a computer man, I have to admit. I'm more for the game side.
The key things we kind of focus on is with temperature is you do lots of soak testing. So if you have a look at most hardware, mobile hardware and things, they'll say something like, you can now encode a video in 4 minutes. Now, 4 minutes can use peak performance because at the end of the 4 minutes you can cool down again. What we aim for in gaming is sustained performance. So how hard can you push the CPU and GPU for a sustained long period of time? 4 minutes is like you can go really high in the temps and then let it cool off. With a game, if you're racing for 35 minutes, or we found with Total War games, sometimes people at the weekend will play for an hour or more. So what you need to do is you need to test for that. So it's a lot of our QA team doing longer tests, but also having a look at if a phone can run at 100%, we probably want to have a look at, like, maybe actually running it at 50% means that you can actually run it without it ever getting too hot, and it will just sit there and always perform the same. So essentially there's no real shortcuts here. It's just lots of testing and optimizing to try and find that sweet spot. So for example, early on in our development testing for our early mobile phone games, I think we first did it for Grid Autosport, we actually took a meeting room, got the heater and cranked it all the way up to sort of 38 degrees. We noticed there was a difference where people were complaining about performance dropping off, and they were in predominantly like South America and areas like that. So we're like, ooh, maybe it's ambient temperature as well. So like there's just a lot of extra testing that you need to do to make sure it performs well. One thing which annoys people more than anything else is you get a game or you get any app and it runs great for 5 minutes and then it starts slowing down. So making sure you can kind of enjoy it throughout the experience is sort of more important than having peak performance on the beginning of a battle. If by the end it's dropped to 15 frames, you kind of want it to be sat there at 30 the whole way through.
What are some of the design approaches you take when you translate, for example, a full-on AAA console game to mobile, like Empire or Alien Isolation or Hitman, so forth?
I mean, that is a big question. Yeah, leaving out kind of the technical side of things, I think on design side, I mean, for one thing, you need to know your game very well, and also your control method. I mean, touch is fundamentally somewhat similar to like a mouse cursor, but of course you don't have multiple buttons to work with. You don't have the second hand doing things separately with the keyboard. So things that are relatively easy to do, in parallel on desktop, you need to find a way that they are more comfortable to do in series, because you've kind of got usually one hand doing something on screen at once. Also, obviously, screen space, you need to condense information down without hiding important information. And also, I mean, this is a desktop game, strategy game. A lot of those use things like tooltips, and you need to have a handling for that, because systems like that don't tend to work as well on touch if you just copy them straight over. So there's lots of little things like that just your first starting point for it has to be understanding the medium that you're working with.
So, I mean, I think another thing which we learned the other way around is people are more accurate touching a display than necessarily using a mouse at the initial targeting. So if you actually aim at something and click, you can be incredibly accurate with a mouse, but getting to that point, you've got to move your hand and watch the cursor move on the screen. There's a disconnect there because obviously the cursor is being controlled separately. With your finger, humans naturally will just touch something. That's an advantage. So as Benedict was saying, we try and lean into where are there advantages of touch? Make sure we make the most of those so that the disadvantages of not having be able to multi-touch or right-click go away because we have other gestures. So pinching to zoom, dragging around the map with your finger, those all feel so natural that they feel easier than using a keyboard because you don't have to explain moving around a map with a finger. So it's a lot of those things of understanding the medium, understanding the game, and then a lot of playing the game in your head, and I think just being able to decide that an idea is bad, I think is the most important skill you can learn in design. Is don't get hung up because you came up with something and you put loads of effort in. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Go and look for something better. It's very easy to fall into the trap of, but this worked great in my head, but when we've implemented it, it doesn't quite work, but you kind of want to force it to work, and sometimes it's the skill of like, okay, that was a great idea, didn't work for this game, put it to one side.
If you're working with a very big game with lots of parts, I mean, Empire is very big. Something that works well in one place might work badly or be quite inconsistent with something that works elsewhere. So sometimes your good idea that works in abstract needs to be reshaped a bit so that it fits within the wider whole.
With Total War Empire, and a lot of your previous games, will it have mouse and keyboard support? And if it does, how challenging was it to add this to the port? Because I notice a lot of mobile games often leave out this feature, and I think it's a pretty cool one to have on iPad.
On the technical side, I mean, the game did originally support keyboard and mouse, so there was some code in there originally. The tricky thing about it is when we redesign all of the UI to work for touch, you often you move screens around and things like that, so then we have to like hook up the keyboard and mouse to work with the new UI. So on the technical side, it is extra work, but we found, especially on things like iPad, people use it as a secondary, like a mini laptop.
Yeah, I mean, because fingers are quite cursor-like, the fundamental ergonomics sort of don't need to change too much to support mouse and keyboard. But yeah, it's mostly more on making sure that the UI is convenient, that if you've got keyboard shortcuts to open menus and whatnot, that they are intuitive. But also, I mean, speaking personally, I tend to not like UIs where you glue too many, using mouse, and you glue too many buttons to like the corners of the screen, because it kind of tires me wrists out going here, there, and everywhere, which I don't get with touch to the same degree, because it's more of a small screen intuitive, just bish bash bosh. For Empire, one of the things I wanted to do, at least for my own benefit, if nothing else, was cluster a few commonly clicked elements in the same parts of the screen, so you can just very easily make small gestures, go douche and do the thing you want to do. But also it helps in the UI respect, the fact that this is that we'd done Medieval 2 mobile previously, so we're always taking lessons from the previous game forward, and that one also had mouse and keyboard support, so we were able to learn a few things from that.
Do you often find with reviews, like on the App Store, that you have to sometimes change like the UI and so forth? Like, do you get like feedback from that?
Yes, I mean, I admit, like within design, we read every review. We have we automatically harvest all the reviews and put them into our internal chat system. So yeah, we get a lot of feedback of, as I said, it's mostly finding the pain points that people have, and then thinking like, how do we get rid of the pain point? And it isn't always the same as fixing the issue they had. Sometimes the problem is at a much deeper level, and if we change something fundamentally lower down, all of the little niggles go away. So it's very easy to, and I think in the early days of Rome, when we were like, well, I was kind of learning a little bit more about how these things work, you sort of go, oh, there's that one problem, we can fix it. That one problem, we can fix it. And actually what you really need to do is sometimes take a step back and go, all of these little things are all because the gesture doesn't accelerate right. We fix the little gesture accelerating, all of a sudden the little ones go away. So now a lot of our stuff is looking at it of seeing, okay, that's what they're complaining about. Where's the actual fundamental problem or thing that we could improve?
Sometimes what's phrased by users as a complaint is more of a preference thing. So one thing that we've been doing with our games more as we've been going forward is adding options for users to tweak or tune certain things. For instance, in Rome, when you pinch the camera, it kind of zooms on screen to the bit of the map that you're pinching on. Some users love that because it feels very intuitive. Other people don't, because they want the gesture to be very consistent in terms of what it does, regardless of where the hand is on the screen.
Oh, okay.
And so the solution to that is you don't force one or the other, you give the users the option, and then you fight with your lead designer about what the default should be.
With mobile games, we tend to redraw all of the user interface. So all of the buttons, the backgrounds, all of those things, buildings, unit cards, all of that gets repainted by our internal art team, or upscaled, repainted, cleaned up, because originally most of these games are played on a desktop, and even if you have a really nice MacBook like I've got here, I've got a MacBook Pro, the resolution of the MacBook Pro falls into insignificance compared to the resolution on a phone in terms of dots per inch and sharpness. The UI naturally will never look quite as sharp on a phone. Like, it needs to get redone and repainted to be really, really nice and sharp and just feel like the rest of the OS.
Particularly when you're porting games that came out a good few years ago when monitors were, different standards and whatnot. Sometimes you just got to just add in extra detail that wasn't there originally, because otherwise, if you grab it on a phone and you stick it next to your face, you'll see the pixels.
So yeah, we spent a lot of time on that, but also I think with Empire in particular, this game is super big, and there are lots of things that people have been playing it for over a decade going, oh, I wish this was a bit easier. So we spent a fair bit of time trying to improve those, looking at newer games from the Total War franchise. So for example, when you're moving units around the map and you get into battles, they get damaged, and you need to go and replenish them and bring them up to full stack. Now, the old games, like the older games we've already done, like Rome and Med 2, this was a manual process. You kind of went in, you clicked the button, next turn, they were restored when they were in your settlement. And with Empire, they started moving over to the new system, which is automatic replenishment. And this was done so you don't have to manually kind of maintain all of this stuff of checking your army and everything. It just would slowly rebuild over time. Empire was kind of halfway between the systems, so it isn't completely like the modern systems that does it completely automatically, and it wasn't like the manual system. It was kind of a foot in both camps. So we've added an option that you can turn off if you want that turns on automatic replenishment, and that's on by default, and it works like the more modern games. So it just reduces the overhead of things you need to do, so you can focus on the fun.
The replenishment system was a significant one. We knew we wanted to get that working, and as I say, it's based on what Creative Assembly did with their later titles, but we had to make sure that it worked appropriately within the balance of Empire. It wasn't a simple copy-paste job. We wanted to make sure that this fairly fundamental change to the gameplay still made the game play the way that it was intended to, that it was very compatible with the original balance and design. So we spent a bit of time playing through with different numbers, different modifiers, different values, just to get that feeling right, where you can't just throw your troops willy-nilly into every engagement and then get them all back next time. But also you don't feel like you're so lacking in manpower you can't do the interesting things that the game wants you to be able to do. You can't make maneuvers, you can't fight battles, lose, and then come back another day. Another one that we touched on, research system. This game, in fact, even more than some of the later ones, research is a really central aspect to it, because the span of the game is about 1700 to 1800. The game had, and still has, a really good set of technologies in it that represent a lot of these changes. However, one of the things that we thought was perhaps not quite as ergonomic or convenient as it could have been is how you interact with that system. The original system had it that basically you have a certain number of universities, and each university you give a task to research a particular thing. That works really well for one bit of the game, but very early on, when you have very few universities, it can be a little bit annoying, because you really have to hyper-specialise in one thing or another, and you can't sort of spread your activities more thinly. And then also at the end of the game, when you have loads of universities, you can actually run out of things to keep them all busy with. So one of the tweaks we made was we kind of pooled the effect of all of your universities together into a single pool of points that you then assign to individual tasks, and that balanced the experience across the whole span of the game a little better. And it also helped us target a kind of usability point where we could surface to the user when they had unspent points, and by doing this make it easier on mobile to keep track of the research alongside all of the other things you have to keep track of in this game.
I think we also kind of just spent a bit of time doing kind of simpler, smaller things, but had a really good knock-on effect, especially on mobile, where you don't want to go in and out loads of screens. So for example, all of the different types of research, we now, when you're on that page, it lists the factions that already own that research. So if you want to do negotiations to say, hey, I'd like to buy your improved cannon, you can go to the improved cannon and be like, oh, the French have got improved cannon, and then you can go and use your diplomat. Before, you could kind of work this out, but it was like doing a lot of extra steps. So on mobile, where you've got restricted space, it's just trying to optimize that. We had a few other ones with sort of, let's say, buildings where you'd work out this building will add an extra 100 gold or whatever to your economy, and you're like, okay, that cost me like 1900, therefore it's going to be X number of turns and the percentages. So now we just had a little thing of just like, approximate return on investment is going to be 12 turns. So you easily, when you're going through your options, you can be like, that one, okay, I'm going to get return of investment in like 4 turns for that thing. That one's 18 turns. So if I'm just trying to improve my economy quickly, I can pick that one. Same thing with trade. We just made the UI, added some extra information to the UI, so you can at a glance go, spice is massively undervalued. Also, it's pretty much completely controlled by the French. So if I want to turtle the French economy, I just go and put some of my ships on their trade routes, and all of a sudden, their entire spice trade goes through the floor. Basically weakened and softened them up, and then you can go and attack. So it's all about allowing people to get the information quicker, so you can spend more time on what I tend to call the fun, which is basically the tactical side of the game, of being able to like go, okay, I want to take over the French, I'll ruin their economy so they don't have as much money, and now I can easier attack. You could do that before on the desktop, but with a smaller screen and everything on mobile, we took the advantage to spend a bit of extra time to sort of improve the areas of the UI. It seems that we're having to redo them anyway. We have a decade of CA games since then that we can cherry pick. Oh, that was a really nice improvement they did for, Attila. Maybe we'll just borrow an idea from there.
Because fundamentally, we're not trying to change what Empire is. It should play like the version of Empire you remember, making it not feel too different from what you had before, but play, as best as we can make it, and And actually, one thing, just going back to the previous topic with art that relates to that, is one of the things we did from Medieval 2 onwards that we kind of learnt with Rome is trying to match the art style or some of the stylistic elements within the the visuals, the UI frames and whatnot, for people who've already played the game, to make it very clear in their mind that this is Empire on a phone. So we got some of the nice textures, the wood panellings, and the great, is it Rococo, Baroque, the kind of great gold flourishes you have and boards and things. So my art history is not very good.
So I think it's that, and talking of the art team, they spend ages. Sometimes we tweak the design of an icon to make it more obvious. But it's those perceptions that you realise on a phone, because the screen is so much smaller, your icon needs to be that much better. You have resolution, but also icons are smaller. So you just need to think about these things of like, how do you make everything instantly understandable? If it's instantly understandable, you don't need to add a additional tutorial to explain how do I attack. If the attack thing's got a big pointy sword, everyone's like, well, that's the attack button. So use that kind of thing of just, do the plain tests of, if people keep on asking, how do I set the settings? Using a cog is probably a good idea, because everyone knows 2 cogs together is settings.
Also related to all of this is, in addition to perhaps tweaking existing icons, sometimes when you're doing the move of information to mobile, you want to shift things to icons that used to be text-based. Buildings, like farms for instance, you can have 2 farms of the same tier, but one can be more productive than the other. They have like a base prosperity, they're more fertile. Originally that information was surfaced in a tooltip. So if you wanted to compare farms, you had to tooltip over 2 different farms and decide which one was better. That doesn't really work as well on mobile. So what we did was we surfaced that information in an icon on the card for the farm. So we had to play around with a few ideas for what would be appropriate designs for that sort of thing. And sometimes like menu navigations as well, like a text-based button becomes an icon-based button, and so you need something that fits. All that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So I think the long and short of it is there's lots of like little things you can do when bringing a game that's a decade old over to a new platform. It isn't just a cut it, move it across, make it run, and we're done. It was more just like, how do we give it kind of like the respect it deserves? Because like all of these games that we do tend to have like a massive existing fan base who really love those games, and the studios who poured all their time and effort into it. Whatever we do kind of makes it better, or makes it so it works on iPhone/iPad as if it was designed for that from the beginning, which requires a bit of extra work, but I think it kind of pays off because it's just that extra little bit of effort of like, if some of these games I'll happily play myself, and I was just like, that's always kind of like the rule we kind of have of like, if you're going, oh, this is really a lot of fun, then you know that you're headed in the right kind of direction, really. Oh, and cheats. I guess that's the one last thing which we mentioned. We Empire removed the cheat console that existed in Rome and Med, and especially on mobile. People like giving themselves money, instant building buildings, and instant building troops. Those are basically like the big three things that everyone does. So Empire didn't have any cheats at all, but we've added in the same kind of put your fingers in the corner of the screen and bring up a console. But this time we just have buttons. You don't need to type any codes in. You have a button that gives you money, a button that instantly builds all of the troops in your queue, and a one that builds all of the buildings in your queue. So,
and the fog of war as well.
And the fog of war.
Yeah.
So you can toggle those four things on and off just with simple buttons. So that should greatly help sort of people who kind of want the more tell me the story experience of just, you kind of want to slowly take over the world, but you maybe don't want to play around with like the economics as much. We found that like nearly every single Total War game, there is a mod or a cheat out there to give yourself a whole pile of money.
Interesting.
Because we knew that loads of people would probably be instantly asking of like, but where's the cheat gone? But again, with the new UI system that we've got now, we could turn it into buttons, so you don't need to learn any codes anymore. It's just tap the button, get the money, have fun. It's our most viewed YouTube guide for Rome. How do I use the console? And that's got like 10 times as many views as how do I control my units in battle, because people like cheating 10 times more. Yeah.
For Empire, what version of the Metal API are you using? And also, what is your experience using this API?
I went and checked. We technically use Metal 3, I think, but it's kind of it isn't the core features of Metal are the same no matter which version of Metal you're using, because it's the Metal running on the phone or the iPad that is the important bit. The core functionality and the core performance of Metal on iOS 18 is probably going to be slightly better and slightly have less minor bugs than 17, than 16. Yes, I believe we target the 3.0 tool set, but that's mostly because with this game we didn't, the lighting model doesn't use stuff like some of the new graphic settings. Ray tracing, for example. Metal, ray tracing is in Metal. It's one of the newer features, but the game engine doesn't really use it, so therefore we're not using it. There are a few other ones which I think you'd probably be interested in. Is I think Metal Effects. The Empire game engine, because it's doing a lot of simulation and everything, is CPU limited, not GPU limited. So Metal Effects and all of these upscalers work on the principle of reducing your GPU load and giving you putting a bit more on the CPU. And that is really great for super high-end graphics when you're really hammering that GPU and you've got lots of spare CPU time. With this game, there's so much AI and simulation going on. Using Metal Effects or something would actually probably slow the overall game down. So we didn't use it. We have it all in the libraries, and we tend to do side-by-side tests and things. But it was actually better for us to optimize in a different direction and try and get the CPU optimizations up there so that we could maintain performance. I mean, I think you can get 10,000 units or something like that on screen at once.
Like 160 men a unit, 20 units in an army, up to 8 armies.
Yeah.
My mental math is bad, but it's a lot.
Yeah, that's where a lot of the balance and the work comes in, is like 3D battles is a completely different problem to our campaign problems.
And of course we've got land and naval battles, water and rippling fabric of sails and all that kind of thing.
And an interesting thing about this game is all of the sailors are individually actually AI units. So that means from the AI simulation point of view, a naval battle, you might be like, oh, there's only 8 ships on either side, it should run quicker. every one of those ships has actually got 400 people on board, and it's emulating all of those people, so that as you fire stuff like smaller shot and kill off some of the gunners,
Or even do a boarding action and do
Yeah.
full melee combat.
yeah. So you'll see all of those things kicking off. So it's actually really quite detailed when you zoom in, and because of that, there's a lot of CPU going on. So we spend a lot of time finding out like where to spend your effort to get the best experience, as opposed to kind of being able to sort of buzzword say, yes, we're using metal effects. If it isn't that useful and we could spend all of our time using a different API to get an overall better experience, we tend to do that. So we use absolutely anything we can, but only if it makes sense.
Yeah, that's cool. Because I always find it interesting when developers want to, yeah, like you said, use Metal Effects or Metal 3 to like kind of promote their game, but it often doesn't really matter. But yeah, that's cool. Did you utilize the Metal Performance HUD to optimize this game for iPhone and iPad?
The Metal Performance HUD is a tool, however, it's kind of more commonly used on the testing side of things or interested third parties like yourself, because it shows raw frame rate. But raw frame rate on its own isn't that useful for optimizing. All it tells you is the frames dropped in this area. If I gave you a raw frame rate graph of a lot of our games on the loading screen, you'd be like, wow, the frame rate in the loading screen is going from like 1 frame a second to 30 and back down to 1. There's nothing animating right then, so we're actually trying to drop the frame rate so we can use the CPU to do load the data. You need to use it interpretively. So yes, it's a tool that we can use. Before the Metal Performance HUD existed, we already had written our own frame rate tools inside our game libraries. We tend to use those. They hook into the same things that the Metal Performance library would do. But on the development side, without giving anything away, you'd normally capture an area of bad performance and then analyze the capture using instruments or Tracy or all of the different tools that are out there. This specific battle is slow on this specific Apple device. It's really slow on an iPhone 13, but it's quicker on a 12. Why? Oh, it must be something to do with the GPU. So they'll just grab a frame, have a look at it, and be like, oh, okay, we're doing something here, and then the developers will look into it that way. So I'd say Metal Performance HUD is kind of it's very fun and interesting for people who want to see what's going on under the hood. But if you're actually trying to fix and optimize things, it's kind of just like the first part of it. We do a lot of things where QA are not allowed to have a frame rate counter on. It's play the game and then tell us how does it feel, and they'll be like, oh, it feels like it's running at 40, and it might be moving around. And another time they'll be like, oh, it feels like it's really slow, and it's actually just no, the game's running really fast. It just has a minor pause every 3 seconds. There's a single frame that was taking too long because of something in a driver, and you fix it, and all of a sudden the perceptions change. So I think sort of performance analysis I find it really interesting of like going into all of the little nitty-gritties. But that's the kind of thing you use these tools for. Is you should turn them on and off and not like live by them. You should use them alongside human perception to try and nail down and track down the thing that changes the experience. Because when it gets down to it, personally, I care about the user's experience. The actual like frame rate and all of these other things help build that experience. But all of that should be taken to one side, and basically you put someone down in front of a device, and if they're having fun playing Empire, that's the most important thing. But these tools are incredibly useful for us to pick out those little things and work out, oh, that's why they say it feels jumpy. The frame rate analysis tool is showing that we're dropping a frame every once in a while. Let's look into that. Then we capture that section. The devs look into it. They realize that it's a buffer overflow or something. We fix that one little thing, and then suddenly everything's way nicer. We've had loads of examples of that over the years with like racing games in particular, where we had a racing game in the early days of Metal, and it was sat at 60 frames a second all day long, except every 3 or 4 seconds something flushed on the memory and we got a momentary spike. So you were driving a rally car at 100 miles an hour, and if the little spike happened when you were braking in the corner, you'd crash, and you were like really frustrated, even though the performance was amazing apart from that. Whereas in other games, we were floating at like 40 frames a second, and it's quite interesting. The difference between 40 and 60 isn't as big as the difference between 30 and 40. So as soon as people will often notice the difference between 30 and 40, but it feels so much quicker. Once you get to 40 to 60, the number of people who perceive it, especially in a slower game like Empire, it drops off really quickly. It's only when you're moving really fast, like moving around the map, you'll notice having a higher frame rate. In a 3D battle, less so when you see the firing and everything, because you don't need it. In a racing game, high frame rate is useful for fast cars, doesn't make as much difference on a slower car. So if you're racing, let's say, as you're an Australian V8 supercars, they're slower, you can get away with 30 more than, let's say, an Indy car or a Formula 1 car. They're doing 220, and the frame rate, therefore, is more important because every frame you've moved further down the track for the same frame rate. So if you're traveling twice as fast, you need twice the frame rate to have the same perceived motion per frame. So, yeah. Anyway, I'm going off into the deep end of performance analysis.
That's good. That's great. It's very useful to hear all that, actually. Side question, though, for both of you. What is your favorite game, just to play, just when you're home or whatever?
Well, at the moment, do you know Stardew Valley?
Yeah, of course, yeah.
I've been playing that, or rather not playing it, because I'm waiting for a big update that's about to land. But I find that after a day spending on big military actiony things, little cozy farm thing is just perfection.
And you, Edward?
Right now, I've been playing Cyberpunk. I didn't get around to playing it the first time around because being too busy, and I picked that up. And a bit like Benedict, the games I'm playing tend to try and be a palate cleanser from what I'm doing at work. So if we're working on loads of Total War games and strategy games, I'll go and play a racing game or a 3D shooter. If we're working on a racing game every day, your brain is I've had enough of racing games, I want to go and play something else. So yeah, Cyberpunk. Before that, I spent a fair bit of time playing the Animal Crossing on Switch. Love a good bit of Animal Crossing. I just love the fact that there is no ending to that game. It's just you do it for the point of doing it. You're wandering around, you build your house. Tommy Crook is constantly having a go at you. So yeah, I think I'd kind of bounce around the games. Been do a fair bit of Sega and Mario with my daughter as well, bringing her back to the classics.
Yeah, awesome.
Oh, and if you want something controversial for your video, I've also been playing Dark Souls 2, the best Dark Souls. Stick that in the headline and get some clicks.
But yeah, thank you for your time, guys. It's been an absolute pleasure. I play your games literally almost every week, which is crazy. So yeah, it's been very nice to speak to you both, and thank you for your time. And there's nothing else you wanted to add, I'm supposing?
No, I think that's all. Feel free to. We're probably going to. You probably have to trim parts of